In this video, we will learn about Japanese speech style and style mixing, which is very important knowledge to gain in order to have a natural conversation in a given context. When first learning Japanese, you were most likely taught that there were two ways to construct a statement, plain form and must form. You also probably learned that their use needs to be determined by the level of politeness and social distance. This system of discerning the level of politeness in conversational styles is called wakimae, and understanding it is a very important part of learning Japanese. Traditional teaching materials say that casual speech, which uses plain form, is meant to be used when speaking to an equal or someone of lower social standing than you, such as a junior team member or employee. While on the other hand, polite speech, which uses the must form, is meant to be used when speaking to superiors, teachers, seniors, or people you don't know at all or very well. Sometimes in-group and out-group dynamics are also mentioned. When interacting with people in-group, you use casual speech, and when interacting with those in the out-group, you use polite speech. However, native Japanese speakers do not speak like this. Research has shown that Japanese speakers in different contexts, such as work, home, and school, mix their use of plain form and must form. For example, in a conversation between a mother and her child, some may think that the mother would speak casually to her child, who would respond formally, yet this is not the case. The mother speaks using must form to show responsibility in serving food, while the child uses the plain form to express their opinion. So we see that in reality, there are many different nuances and contexts, such as relationship setting and the level of spontaneity, all of which determine what style is used as shown in the scopa. And one common mistake learners make when speaking Japanese is speaking in one speech style without any deviation. This strict adherence to formality is considered unnatural sounding, especially as you grow familiar with another person. Let's learn a new approach to determining speech style so that we can better communicate with our Japanese peers. First, try to think of language as a representation of yourself or your consciousness, and that there are different conversational styles that allow us to project different versions of ourselves. In this concept, there are two general ways to do this: the spontaneous style or the disciplined style. The spontaneous style is closest to your authentic self. There is little need to project a certain image of yourself or politeness, so in this style, you generally use the plain form when speaking. With the disciplined style, there is more distance between your true self and the self that you are depicting through speech. You want to leave a favorable impression, so you'll use a more disciplined speech style. To better understand this, let's think about an example. Think about how in Japanese classes, the teacher still uses must form when addressing the class. If we use the rules that are traditionally taught in Japanese language learning materials, you would think that the teacher would use plain form since they have a higher social standing than their students. However, this is not correct, and our new understanding of speech style choice can help us. When the teacher is presenting information, they are taking on an on-stage persona where there is a wider separation between the self of the speaker and the content that is being said. The teacher is projecting an image of authority that is detached from any of their personal characteristics or opinions, so they use the disciplined speech style. But if you were to speak with them in a one-on-one conversation, they would be interacting with you using a closer mode of self, so they would switch to the spontaneous speech style. From this example, we can see that these speech styles are not strict rules for us to follow in every interaction, and that they instead only provide a base or foundation from which we can grow our interactions. Conversations in Japanese are very fluid, and a single interaction can include many different shifts between the spontaneous-based style and the discipline-based style. Remember what we mentioned previously, that there are many different contexts that dictate the way we speak, and that it's rare to speak in one speech style completely. Let's look at some examples from Terrace House. Listening to the cast's speech patterns, you will hear a lot of them mixing plain form and must form. Knowing the context of their situation explains why this makes sense. In Terrace House, the group of housemates live together and are expected to form close relationships with each other. It would be unnecessarily rigid if everyone spoke politely all the time. Looking at this specific interaction, they're familiar with each other now, so they generally use a more spontaneous speech style, but they still have moments where they speak in a more disciplined fashion. In this case, Hana is teaching Miwako and Aya how to cook, and she uses must form frequently towards them since she's speaking with an authoritative tone as the person giving instructions. Miwako uses the same language in return to playfully reinforce this by calling her senpai. Lastly, when they're eating, they say itadakimasu, which is a very common phrase Japanese speakers say before eating their meal. And so is the phrase "gochishou-sama deshita," which is said at the end of the meal. This example shows that even if you were with friends, you can use must form in the above cases, and it wouldn't sound unnatural or completely change your tone. Looking at this interaction, the cast is meeting each other for the first time, so the discipline-based style is used, generally following the mass form. But the use of plain form is still mixed in because they're building relationships. In this case, there's common use of speaker-oriented language, which is when you're talking about yourself or voicing your thoughts out loud. In this case, Haruka and Kaori learned that Shohei came from far away, so they reinforced that new piece of knowledge by repeating it to themselves. Aizuchi is also commonly used in casual and informal situations. Aizuchi are Japanese interjections that can be considered a more spontaneous way to engage with your conversation partner, but are still acceptable to use in situations that require more discipline. However, be careful with overusing Aizuchi in informal situations as they can be considered rude, so if you're unsure, just stick to nodding. Lastly, in Japanese conversations, it is also very common to say incomplete sentences, whose endings can be inferred or to avoid being too definite in what is being said. Incomplete endings can also invite the listener to complete the thought in a co-constructive way. In this example, Kenny is saying that he's a vocalist of his band to make the statement more open-ended and invite the others to continue the conversation. This last lesson on incomplete thoughts could be especially useful in your conversations to build a more active conversation, and it can be used in so many different ways that it's been the subject of research. You can end sentences with conjunctions like te or de, with conjunctions shi and no de, with conjunctions to and ba, with the quotation particle to, with particles wa and te, and by using particles that list examples such as toka. Remember the idea of language being an extension or projection of the self. It would be strange if you were always speaking with a detached sense of self and a disciplined style to someone you are trying to be friends with. Style mixing helps us avoid this. For example, if someone asks you a question, you may say instead of hai to begin your answer, then provide supplemental information using must form towards the beginning of your interactions. So if they were to ask you, ramen ga suki desu ka? You may answer, suki desu. And as your relationship grows, you use more plain form and more interactional particles. Remember, the best way to learn is by listening to others. So if you're ever stuck, listen to your conversation partners and follow their lead so you can learn how to better interact.